right, Gabe, you're on.
I'm Gabriel Sterling. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Georgia Secretary of State's, but I think the reason we're here now is because I was formerly the Voting System Implementation Manager.
Okay. I'm Marc Nolan, resident out of Woodstock, Georgia. Been here 35 years almost, and former technology guy that's retired and enjoying life and trying to take it easy.
I can tell by your accent you're not originally from Woodstock.
No, thank God. But I remember Woodstock when it was a single-lane highway. It used to be
It's a lot different.
Yes, yes. So you already gave me you already answered my first question on how long you've worked here. You've worked off and on in the state in various roles.
I came here when he was sworn in, so it would be January 14th or 15th of 2019.
2019.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So since we're talking about the 2020 election, you probably have heard a lot of questions over the last 2.5 years or whatever, including the one you went to Geneva on, that I watched for an hour and a half or hour and 51 minutes.
I'm glad somebody watched it.
Yeah, at least you got some views out of it. So the question I always ask is, do you believe the ES&S system was broken and it needed to be replaced? I mean, let's take out the Curling versus Kemp lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
And in previous years, were there issues with the system that, according to Mrs. Warren, the users, voters, liked, and really liked, and they had, apparently I think ESS had, at that time, 70% of the United States ballots, voting systems. So my question is, do you believe the ES&S was broken?
Well, let's get my role first.
Okay.
My role is that I work for the Secretary of State's office. The legislatures are the ones who decide what systems we have. And I believe the first hearings that were about replacing the system, which at that point was 2016, it was rolled out in 2002 for that election, so it was about 14 years old. And there was a very odd thing that happened with that. When they did the lifetime license, essentially the original Diebold system that was purchased by us, Diebold basically went bankrupt,
Sure.
in large part because of that
Sure.
perpetual license. But when they split them, the Obama administration said, okay, ES&S, you can control the software, the hardware, which is the equipment we had, which was the boxes and the touchscreens. And then they believe another company, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head right now, you control the software. So at that point, we were prohibited from doing any software updates based on that. So there were some software holes that we could not even begin to address. And that started during the Obama administration. And essentially, they were not making parts anymore. We were cannibalizing other pieces. So there was actual physical issues with the life of those machines. Secondarily, there was a strong push to put some kind of paper ballot system in place so that it could be audited. Because right now, if you remember correctly, a lot of our county officials loved it because it was easy. It was a very easy system to run. But a lot of the voters, we were starting to get pushback going, well, how do I know? Because a recount literally was you press the button again and you just do the same data you just had.
Right.
So
that's not really a recount.
That's not really a recount, but that was what qualified under the law.
Yeah.
In fact, in 1994, I remember we had to do a recount one time for 14 votes. The only thing that flipped was the hand-marked paper ballots that were the absentees. That we went from an 18-vote win in Barrow County to a 14-vote win. So likely a time, but again, we didn't do policy, we just implemented policy. Now the SAFE Commission was started by Governor Kemp to look at what's the best replacement, and they kind of settled on BMDs. The Secretary ran on BMDs. I personally think the BMD solution is better than the ES&S solution because you do have that auditable paper trail and the ability to upgrade and enhance security over time, which we did not have with the ES&S system, especially on their election management systems, which were just getting antiquated, and the physical pieces of equipment were just, we were at cannibalizing stage. When it was reaching end of life.
Sure.
As an IT guy, you've seen those kind of systems happen before.
Absolutely. So that really, thank you very much for that. What about the concerns that the systems were not verifiable, auditable, recount capable, or transparent since there was no tangible ballot? I mean, how do you address any or each of those?
On ES&S?
Yeah.
You have to put a ballot on. I mean, that's one of the problems is there is no way to audit it for sure. We did run what they call parallel testing, which you would basically run the machine at the same time. We would videotape it in the same environment, running the same elections. So we would see if there was anything software-wise that was getting picked up. They would still check the hash values because everything they would do the logic and accuracy testing for each machine before they launched, including the ones we had in our testing environment.
Okay.
And they did that originally. They stopped doing it for a few years. And they picked it back up again before I was here. I believe it was in 2016 they started doing that again.
Okay.
Kevin Rayburn, our former elections attorney, said that was a good thing to do because he had kind of gotten immersed in this, and that's when they started doing that again.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to delve into a little bit of the RFP and RFI process. I, as a technology guy, I believe a lot of the problems come from the RFI and RFP, how it's written, who does the scoring, who doesn't do the scoring, why the scoring is done certain ways, how weights are done
Listen, the RFP defines your outcomes if you do it the right way or the wrong way. So I totally agree with that. Just so you know, RFI was done before I got here.
I got it. So you mentioned about I think the procurement system was very antiquated or archaic or whatever the word. It was the procurement system was bad. It was old, antiquated. I think you used the word on one of your discussions. I don't know which one it was.
Well, if you're talking about the PeopleSoft system we used to get the bids in?
No, yes, PeopleSystem, yes.
Okay, so what that had to do with was during the, we had a bid conference, and we were trying to explain to people, do not wait to the last minute to do this. This is a state system, and even when we were doing the demonstration, it took 3 or 4 minutes to upload a document, and that's why we literally said, this is what we're talking about. Don't wait till the last day.
So see, that's the question. So the hard intercivic bid was considered, a no-go from the procurement side of the house because they were 2 minutes late.
No, they were not 2 minutes late. They started trying, again, this is my memory. I think they started trying to load it at like 10 p.m. the previous night.
Okay.
And then 2 hours after the thing was over, they called and said, hey, have you gotten our bid? And Vernicia Favors, our procurement manager, said, there is no bid visible from you on this site. And then they said, if you talk to support from the other one. And at that point, they were hours and hours behind. Everybody else managed to get it in, but
So you think it's a user issue from their standpoint, maybe?
Well, there's two things.
Hard interactive?
They should have started much earlier, like they were warned to repeatedly. And then they didn't do good follow-up. If it had been like a couple of minutes, we wouldn't have had DOAS, the Department of Administrative Services, would have said, okay, yes or no to get that one in.
Okay, I got it. I got it. But I mean, I don't know why I heard the 2 minutes, but it seemed, in some of the documentation I've written, the elections directors appeared to have favored the clear ballot system. Do you know why they weren't involved in the final selection at all? I know you said you maybe not involved in that.
Well, there were elections administrators on the committee who did the scoring.
Okay.
And I don't know where you get the idea that I've got no reason to think that, because most elections directors I know preferred working with ES&S, not clear ballot.
Okay.
Because they knew that they had relationships, they knew the people, they've been supporting them for years. I've never heard about anybody saying they like clear ballot more.
Okay.
And the clear ballot one that did come in, it was scored with the Smartmatic one. And that one was the most expensive and the lowest score on the rankings. So it was way out of scope on those things.
I did see that. So, and thank you. You were talking about the scoring side of the house. So on the technical side, it was initially given the top spot to ES&S. And
by a very small amount, but yes.
And did you go back and ask for a BAFO on both of these, or did you just sit down and say to these guys, hey, I heard your overview going, hey, Joe Blow, you guys are too high, you're second.
What happened was we went back and we decided to, even though, what do you call it? Dominion had come in first because of we were given a range, and I could be a little bit off on this. I think we could have gone up to 50% of the thing being priced or down to 10%. And we wanted to get a good value for the taxpayers, but we didn't want it just to be flat out one on price. So we kind of settled on 250. And the way that the scoring worked was, if you were in first place with the price, the best price, you get all 250 points. And then you get however much the other one is percentage-wise over them, they lost percentages of those points.
Okay.
So,
fair enough.
So that's how that was set. And then we wanted to put the majority of the scoring on the technicals because we wanted to have a good system that worked. And that was 750 points. It's a 1,000-point thing set in the Georgia Procurement Code to do that. So we got them both in, and we figured they were close enough. And frankly, I figured, okay, we can leverage these guys against one another to try to get a better price, because you obviously can't change technical scores anymore. And we basically, as you said, a best and final was what we were going for. But it was kind of funny because Ryan Germany and I were the ones who went in to negotiate part of this. And I said, okay, who's going to be the black hat in this thing? And we'll figure it out. So I became the black hat in both. And frankly, ES&S was kind of lucky to have made it through because they didn't hit a couple of the points that were required, but we kind of said, okay, they're in here, we got to do it. They put 2 years of support, 2 to 3 years on their e-poll books and no cost after that. And that should have been disqualified because they should have supposed to give the full cost of the life of the system. But we basically said, okay, you're allowed. And in that meeting, I said, look, you didn't even do this. And you know, we worked with DOS to allow you to come in and continue to do this. And the CEO was like, he looked down this way and looked down this way at his team and was like, I don't know what's going. He felt on his heels at that point. I said, look, you're in first place on those, but you know, but you're losing on price. So you've really got to sharpen your pencil and come back to us. Then same thing with Dominion. I said, guys, you know, you're in second place on technicals. They can come back and beat you on price because they know the number to hit now. So I remember when we did finally get the final unsealed bids, I was standing over that office over there, and they came down by another $9 million in the final one. So I was like, okay, we've really just knocked a home run for taxpayers, and we got a system that we know is going to work. Because that was, I was very pleased with the outcome of the RFP on that front. And what was really frustrating for me was when we came in office, we were told there was an RFP, all just about ready to go, but we can't show you because you're not an employee yet. Okay, then we became an employee. Let's find it. Well, we're working on it. We'll get it to you in a week or two. And then about 2 weeks in, they finally came to us and said, well, there really isn't an RFP yet. So that's when I kind of, my hair caught on fire. We started having, you know, a meeting a day, and then we started doing 2 a days, trying to get the things. And we had a meeting at 10 or 9 and one at 2. Everybody had their parts on it. We ended up getting down to, I believe, and again, 30 questions with a total set of sub-questions of 200 and something. I'd have to go back and look, but it was something along those lines. And then we also set up demonstrations for them when they came in for the 3 bidders that came through live. And Dominion literally had the worst presentation in terms of the way it looked and felt because they were the first one and everybody else was still learning. But ES&S's wasn't that great either. Like we did, and just, you know, the scoring team, it included Nancy Boren was one of them. We had a probate court judge from Evans County on there as well. We also had a person from the disability community who was the legal counsel and deputy director of, there's this really long acronym for basically behavioral and physical disabilities kind of thing for Georgia. We had the CIO for the Georgia Technology Authority was on there. We had, let's see, Jordan Fuchs, our deputy secretary, because it's our office, and Kevin Rayburn, who was the guy I was telling you about before, was on there as well. Now the final scoring, unfortunately, we lost the judge from South Georgia because he couldn't make it to the final discussion because his mother died. But it wouldn't have really changed the outcome.
Conspiracy.
Yeah, I know. So, but that was a situation. We intentionally reached out to have a majority not be of this office and have all the skill sets necessary to cover what we were looking at on those things. That's why we did the scoring that way. And I'll be honest, if I get this off the record, the judge, you never have those guys doing your scorings on your RFPs like, you know, adequate. Yeah. You're not helping.
Yeah, I saw that literally. I scored. I literally went through every one of the categories, and I saw probably 75% of the scoring on both sides was adequate.
I know.
There was 2 or 3 that said good, 1 or 2 that said great.
Yeah.
A lot of them were poor and things like that. So
we had a lot of poor. I remember that.
I was surprised by how poor. I mean, I can show you the scoring sheet I did. It's literally, I just tick marked all. I went down and down and down. So this is where I'm going to be a little. I want to just dive a little bit into the contract, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the contract, when I pulled up the research, you know, you front loaded, or someone front loaded $89 million of the $107 million into the first 2 years. Do you really think that's good for the state of Georgia from the taxpayer standpoint?
Well, there's 2 parts about that. Yes, I do, because one of the things we did was we rolled the operational costs, which would have been the licensing, which would have been borne by the counties. Now it will not be borne by the counties at all.
Okay, that's where it confuses me, because I was looking at the contract, and the contract, maybe it's in Mr. Raffensperger's. The contract says right here, annual warranty 2002.
That's a warranty. That's not a.
No, I'm talking about the licenses, right? The licenses were there, but I'm talking about. It says on here county. Okay, these are the optional ones are county driven.
Yeah, so the optional ones for the counties were not for the licensing. That's for the warranty.
That's for the warranty. So
yes.
My question is, why is it going back to the county and not? Because this is going to take taxpayers' money, right? So does every county know that they're going to have to be on the
if they want the warranty, yes. And that's the other thing is they had to pay for the warranties and the licensing on the previous systems before. No matter what system we did, there was going to be licensing and warranties on all of them.
Correct.
And we took those total costs into account, which is why we did the total life cost on that for all 3 of them, for all the people who bid.
Okay.
And also the other thing that we did was we put in we allowed only small escalators on the inside the contract for the county costs. So we locked those costs in for replacements and everything for the next 10 years. So they understood what their costs potentially could be if they needed to do something extra. And on top of that, what we did we had the initial contract delivery, which was 33,000 BMDs, 3,000 scanners, the basics you've seen there. I think 8,000 or 7,000 of the pole pads. And we went to the county and said, what do you need? Right now, so we did Amendment 1, which got us more equipment to basically fill. We didn't want a county to say, we don't have enough. We said, whatever you want to get, we now, because we were able to get.
It's dangerous asking.
Well, I know, but I think secondarily, this was no matter what we did, unfortunately, it was going to be a higher cost for the counties, because when you add paper, it's a totally different system. And they have to have ballot boxes. They have to be secured. I mean, there's a lot more security that has to go in, and there's a lot more storage space. The old ones were great logistically because they were basically little suitcases that you put onto a charger, and that was it. And we even talked about at one point, before I got here, even while we were here, said, why don't we just get a VPAP and put it with it? But that was viewed as kind of inefficient and old technology, and we were trying to not be bleeding edge, but at least leading edge on some of this stuff.
Sure.
And we got the unfortunate part of the timing too, because the next round of Dominion stuff will allow for full face balloting that's going to the EAC like this month, but it requires a different printer. So that's a frustrating thing on that front. You can do it, but it would require multiple pages, which then is another new logistical issue. Every time they get a solution, there is another problem that can come with it. But no, we considered this contract to be very good for the taxpayers because it also and very good for the counties, because it locked in their costs, and they knew if they had to do anything, what it would cost them to do.
Okay. So I'm a betting man. I don't know if you are or not. I'll bet you $1. I'll bet you $1 that $107 million contract will probably, at the end of 10 years, be well into the 200 to 225, maybe even 250 million.
I'll take that bet,
Okay.
but only if we
Okay.
can take out additional equipment that's purchased.
Well, additional equipment should have been in the scope of the contract, right? I mean, someone should have said, in the scope of the contract, if
But we
have to.
understand we bought additional stuff, and they are not, that's in the scope of the contract, but then you got to remember, counties run elections, and historically what has happened, like DeKalb County, for instance, they ended up getting a lot more because they invested lots of money over the years buying more DREs. So they have 164 DREs per voter, so now they have 164 BMDs per voter, because what we made the decision internally was, we don't want them to go backwards based on the 1 for 250, which is what the law calls for at a minimum. So they got a lot more, but that's why we went back and offered every county, said, this is the time to get this stuff for your growth. This is the time for all those things. And we still have some in reserve right now in a warehouse in Cobb County that will be fulfilling some items for that as well.
Okay. So someone from the Secretary of State's office or someone from somewhere is going to do a financial audit every year on the Dominion software, what was sunset, and you're not probably paying any more licensing, right? Money's from ES&S, right? So that's already been
That's
sunset.
done, yeah.
That's done. So there's no more money's going there.
Right.
And so hopefully in 10 years from now, I'll come back and find out if I owe you $1 or you owe me $1. How's that? Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
So somewhere along the line, someone has mentioned the word Fulton County as a problem child.
That would be the secretary, that'd be me, that'd be anybody with a half a brain watching elections.
Okay, and this is where the heart of, I've been told to stay on the 2020 elections, but I'm a guy that believes you have to go back to look at the things that cause problems. So since 1993, you said, you know what, and you said I've even tweeted stuff on 2013. I got banned on Twitter, by the way, so I can't go into Twitter anymore. Too conservative for them. So. You mentioned, as is Secretary of State Raffensperger, that Fulton and some other counties have been problem children. For years, in one of your interviews with Bill Nygett, you said on election day that as far back as 2013, you tweeted about Fulton County. So the problem begs me, as a former project manager, as an implementation guy, when you started this 6-county, started out 9-county
The pilot.
and again, I'm just taking my experience. Okay, I'm looking at it from a rational standpoint. I take feelings outside of it. I'm a data-driven guy.
Yeah.
So if I know that I have problems since 2000, whenever, 1993, and I know Rob Pitts personally. He sat on one of my boards many years
I'm
ago.
sorry.
Yeah, I know. But so it seems like these counties, Fulton, DeKalb, Gwinnett, the problem children.
Gwinnett's not a problem
No,
child.
maybe Cobb.
No,
or-
Cobb and Gwinnett are very well-run counties. And in fact, DeKalb has cleaned up its act from what it was just 10 years ago.
Okay.
Fulton is literally our last big bad problem. Spalding was they had a very bad elections director, who Fulton just hired as the training manager after she got fired from Spalding.
Again.
Listen, and our lawyers talked to us as do not hire this person, and they chose to do it anyway because it's a friend of a friend. Anyway, good. I know I kind of know where your question is going, but I want you to get it out.
Yeah. So I really want to find out. Why was Fulton not in this pilot program? I would think that would have exposed problems within Fulton County on the front end of the election, meaning before anything happened. It seems like we're always late with Fulton County. Ballots come in, we find ballots, they can't find ballots. It seems like we're back in Cook County, Illinois, from my standpoint, right? They're always late. And I know you probably pulled your hair out, as Secretary of State Raffensperger has been, but where is the accountability? I would have thought the accountability, if you could have put them into the pilot program, I don't care if it's a small subset of a conference room pilot. Just take a couple of precincts that are bad precincts inside. I mean, you live in Fulton County. Say, these are the precincts we're going to go after, and put them into the conference room pilot. Do you think that?
We didn't do a conference room pilot. I mean, hold on.
But
listen, you're addressing two different things at the same time. We know Fulton's a problem no matter what we do. We were trying to stress test the system itself in a live fire way, and if I can't remember, frankly, if there was any 2019 municipal elections in Fulton. I just don't recall right now. There might have been, but we wouldn't normally, when we're trying to stress test the system, we did some good counties, some big counties, some small counties, trying to figure out what are the basic issues we were going to run into. Knowing Fulton would have totally, the data we would have gotten from Fulton would not necessarily have served us, other than showing us, yes, guess what, we already know Fulton screwed up. So that was the biggest problem. It didn't occur to me, frankly, to do Fulton County that way because we were trying to test, not Fulton, test the system. So that's why we did it that way. And even then, we had a serious issue because of the way we were trying to handle data, that we had to make a decision on the fly that we learned from on that front. But the system, and then another thing we figured out was that the batteries that we had, the UPCs, the big ones we had were malfunctioning, which was another big thing, takeaway from that. And we found out it was from the handling of them that they would come off of their mounting slightly inside on this big one. So we switched that one to a smaller one that was actually less expensive. And another thing that we did coming out of all this was we figured out one of the big problems with this system was the electrical draw. I'm getting a far field, but I'm telling you the things that we learned from this. So we did programming inside the UPCs to make them capacitors so that they did a draw off the wall, but the printer itself would draw off the capacitor and not off the wall, so it wouldn't throw in a lot of these old, small, not well built out polling locations, throw their breaker every time. So we built those things out. Then from seeing that, what we did was, okay, we're going to have to do an electrical look at all these locations. So we hired E-Systems to go out there and basically inspect every single one and come back, and not just inspect them, we inspect them for several things: access, security, is there a locked door here because the law calls for a locked door, and how is the electrical laid out, can it handle it, and then also put stickers on there so the poll manager can know which ones are attached to which, just in case. So we did that in 2,600 and some odd precincts around the state. But those are things we learned out of that pilot. And again, our goal was to see how the system worked under a real live fire exercise, not to put pressure on a single individual county that we knew would screw it up, and they would find it. You could have found different ways it could have screwed up. I'm not going to argue that point with you because you could have. But we had a big county, we had small counties, we had rural counties, we had urban counties. So we were trying to get a cross section of all those and have good people to work with to get real data back, because as you might have seen, Fulton is nothing but defensive in every situation. We didn't do anything wrong, everything was fine.
Exactly.
So it was not like we had to work in partnership with somebody, and we were not in a good position potentially to do that on top of that. But again, since we weren't in that position, it really didn't cross our mind to say, hey, let's do a pilot in Fulton. So that's the reality of it.
I would hope at some point in time someone does something with Fulton County from a standpoint of a clear audit or something about their process. I know there's been documents written. I know there's been Secretary of Raffensperger and others have sent letters to Barron. And
well, no, don't think about it this way. We literally, And when they completely screwed the pooch in June,
That's exactly right.
I was calling them every week. Do you have enough people? You have enough people? Because this was during COVID. And then
Sure.
they did a couple, I'll go into Fulton more because they are just difficult. And they would say, yes, we got enough people. Yes, we got enough people. We're doing fine. We got enough people. I was like, everybody thinks the Secretary of State runs elections. We can just come in and do things. We can't.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks, that's your point. Everybody thinks, right?
And Secretary in 2019, HB 316 says, I want to have the power the governor of Florida has to go in and fire bad elections directors. They didn't give it to him, so we get all the responsibility and no authority. And all of our authority is hindsight.
Sure.
And it's not even us, it's the SEB. We can do an investigation, we can fine you. Fulton never cares. We were at least able to get Carter Jones in as the monitor on this stuff, so we were able to get a really good report showing how sloppy their processes are. But again, it's sloppiness, irresponsibility. It's not Ocean's 11. You know, they can't be irresponsible and not do a great job and then pull off the biggest heist in history. It's one or the other. They're either evil, devious, evil people, or they're just sloppy. And since you've been a project manager, 99 times out of 100, it's usually stupidity, not evil, that's causing problems.
I would agree with that. And thank you for that overview.
Yeah.
So, I know we have limited time for your standpoint. I know you're busy.
And it was the first time there was ever a monitor put into Fulton from this office, and we were able to get that done.
Okay. Back to Fulton for a minute. Are you aware that, or the Fulton County taxpayers, that the county contracted with Dominion for warehouse workers and some of the technicians to the tune over $450,000?
Yes. After the fact, I knew they were doing it directly, and I was like, okay, it took it off of us because we were going to have to pay for those technicians one way or the other too. So
interesting though, but I couldn't one of the current vendors in the state have provided those services? So for instance, you got 3 or 4 county-run small mom and pop consulting companies that do warehouses. Happy Faces, I think, is one of them, and a couple other ones.
Happy
right?
Faces is another problem in and of itself. But
Okay.
the specific things, Dominion, I didn't know they did warehouse stuff, and I don't know that that's the case.
That's what it said. I have it. Yeah, I have
okay,
it. I have a document from it.
Just because it says warehouse doesn't mean they're doing warehouse work.
Oh no, I know what it meant.
Okay.
I know what it meant, but I'm still surprised that Dominion.
No, I'm not
was a
saying.
vendor.
For the technicians, Dominion was going to be the vendor because they trained them all. We were paying for most of them around the state, and the only reason we did that was because with COVID and the inability to do very good training, we figured out almost all the problems in Fulton, and the handful of problems we had around the state were simple fixes that somebody with a minimal amount of training on the 3 pieces of equipment would get fixed. And I'll give you an example, some of the stuff that we did to mitigate this on top of the technicians. Basically, we fired every gun we could to make sure this thing worked right in the pandemic in 2020. One of the biggest problems we had was the device that's used to code the keys. People were putting them in backwards. So I literally went back and was thinking about a mortar. You know, the Claymore mines where it says this side to enemy.
Claymore mines. I'm an oil infantry guy.
Yeah.
I know
So
very well.
I made a sticker that said this side to poll worker, so they knew which way to put it in. The UPSs, they would press the button and it would light up, but in order to fully power up, you have to hold the button for at least 3 seconds. So we made a sticker that says hold button for 5 seconds. And that was literally the things, because in Fulton, people say, oh, the machines are down. They were never turned on right. So it's not, the machine's busted. You know, that's what they would say. So voters are like, wow, these things are terrible. Nothing's working right. So that's why in November, we had almost no lines. We had no technical issues whatsoever. I think we had 1 or 2 things that got a black screen, and that was it. The entire of all 28,000 deployed machines. So for us, that was an investment to make sure the system worked right, given the issues that were happened in June. There was, if you look at the actual issues we tracked that day, something like 70% were all in Fulton. I mean, it's literally, that was it. But we fired the guns at everything, assuming. And then we had 2 problems. We had Spalding and we had Morgan County that had some kind of coding issue when they loaded their poll pads. Those were the other 2 big ones we had that day. And Morgan County used their backup processes properly. That was the thing Fulton did. They didn't train anybody because they were hiring people the Friday and Saturday before the election. They walked in, had never seen those voting machines until the Tuesday they were there for them.
Okay. But I would ask someone to look at that $450,000. I mean, to me, you know, again, from a project management standpoint, there's things that we say we have in scope that we're going to do. They decided to go out and use Dominion.
Well, no, we were using Dominion too.
No, but they wrote it. They specifically went out and got $450,000.
But I think there might be a disconnect on part of this because the technicians we had, the field techs, the state didn't pay them in Fulton, Fulton paid for them in Fulton, which I was fine with, because they got so much money to run their elections. Our elections budget for a regular elections office is $5.5 million. With their grants and the stuff they got from the county, they had 40 some odd plus $1 million to run their election in Fulton County, which means they should have run a perfect election.
That's exactly. So another question would be, were you aware that the Southern Poverty Law Center actually gave them a grant for $155,000? So, first of all, from what I read and what I've read, and it's documented, that the Southern Poverty Law Center, as you and I know, it's not a very conservative.
No, it's a left-wing fundraising tool.
Right. So how did they weren't even a vendor to the state. They go get a grant for more workers to the tune of $154,000, and then before they try to use the grant, someone comes back and goes, "Hey, by the way, they're not a vendor."
Who's not a vendor?
SPL, Southern Poverty Law Center, was not a vendor to the county, so they had to go back and get,
To be a grantor, I don't think you have to do that. Are you saying?
I think you have to be a grant. If they didn't, I would have argued, why didn't you just go after HAVA funding like you did? Why don't you just go after?
Because counties don't get HAVA funding. The state gets HAVA funding, and then we can do sub-grants.
So that's what I would have done. I would have said, well, look, before we use Dominion, who's already the vendor, why don't we just go back to you guys? Since you've already been through the funding issue and you've already been through the EAC, you've got a front door into it, and get it done. I'm just saying.
I'm still trying to understand what the issue you're seeing with this is right now, honestly, because
I think that any time an organization that has a left or right, and I base this primarily based on the politics in the state of Georgia when I see at the State House, and I hear people talking about, the vendors are bloodthirsty. It was a senator from 2 years ago, right? I'm sure she doesn't say anything now. And then we've got Republicans saying something else. What I'm trying to say is, if no one's asking these questions, it's going to keep on happening. And if everybody thinks it's cool.
But wait a second. The Southern Poverty Law Center, under the new state law, can't give direct grants to the county elections office.
Okay.
That's the law now, as passed in SB 202.
Maybe that's why they.
But that's the new one though. That just got signed into law
Correct.
last year.
Yeah.
But there's nothing stopping free people from giving money for specific things into a government. So, but the Dominion side is what I'm not quite following your concern on, other than, I don't know what they did in the warehouse, but it's not our role to necessarily know that unless they were doing something untoward, which we have no reason to believe. And like I said, I know they're picking up the technician costs, which again I was fine with, because they took it off of our dime and put it onto their dime.
Okay. All right. If you don't see any problem with that, that's fine.
If you tell me what you think the problem is, I'm not following, because there were Dominion subcontractor technicians.
No other county that I know of went after Dominion to get services for that kind of money in any county that I know of.
Yeah, and again, counties run elections, and they have more money than Croesus, and I think they wasted chunks of it.
Sure.
I'm sure they did. But hiring people we were going to hire and pay for anyway doesn't strike me as a bad thing. It probably helps Georgia taxpayers more than anything.
Okay. In project management, I used to do a thing called the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, the Clint Eastwood model.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote a white paper many, many years ago that was called ERP Implementations Based on the Dating Game, the Newlywed Game, and Divorce Court. I got a lot of reviews for that. So,
I wouldn't mind seeing that, actually.
Huh?
I wouldn't mind reading that, actually.
I'll send you a copy.
Okay.
I'll send it to Andy. You have basically three kind of users, I would imagine. You have the good, the bad, and the ugly users, right? From a training standpoint, because you rightly said, you know what? It's training, it's training, it's training. We got to do more training, more training, more training. So were there good training groups that used to say, hey, look, we're going to take this group. These are good training people. These are the people who need some help, and these are the bad ones. And would there be any problems if the state came back and said, well, we've got these great people over here that can do training in their county that need some help over here in this county? Is there anything in the law that says that the people from a county, let's say Muskogee County.
Frankly, we already do it.
Okay. Went into Fulton. That would be the fire truck.
Okay.
That'd be like, okay, we're bringing the fire trucks.
Fulton won't take anything. That's the.
Is that frustrating to you at all?
Here's the issue with Fulton. They can do no wrong in their minds. They view everything politically. I view our jobs here, we are about running good, successful elections and counting the votes, and whether my team, which is my team, the Republican team, wins or loses, we're going to say whether they win or lose.
Sure.
Fulton is 100% politics all the time, and they are big fans of playing the race card on that same front, which is very frustrating from our end.
It is.
So whenever we criticize them, you're being racist. No, you screw things up a lot. And the reality of the way they structured themselves, they didn't care, because they would just pay money, move on to the next thing, and they would just kind of, for lack of a word, power their way through it. And they had Ralph Jones, who stayed there for years.
Sure.
How he kept his job, I have no idea.
Sure.
Rick Barron is a nice enough guy, but he can't manage very well. And I think if you asked him that, he wouldn't necessarily say that, but he would admit that there were challenges to that. And the way they structure themselves, they have a lot of colonels and generals and a lot of privates. And there is no accountability chain in between. There's no corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, majors.
Right.
There's no accountability lines for the way they've structured
It's like being at a bank.
themselves.
Everybody's a vice president. Except
Everybody's
for
vice
the
president.
Tellers.
Yeah, and so but there's no good management train, and there's no good line of accountability. Now, during the 2020 election, the C-suite of Fulton County basically trained all their guns and put a lot of their firepower to make sure they didn't have the June meltdown, and they didn't. On the outward-facing things for the election day, their back-end processes, which they didn't care about because the cameras weren't there, they were still sloppy as hell.
Sure.
And again, one of the reasons I have a good amount of faith in the overall outcomes of the elections, law of large numbers, and also we did the reconciliation of voters to votes. And it was in a small percentage statewide. It gets a little bit bigger in some places, it gets a little smaller in some places, but it's generally
consistent.
there.
It's
pretty
constant.
consistent. It's been that way for years. They never get it 100% right, because it's impossible, because you're dealing with millions of people doing different parts of the process. And when we did the hand audit, one of the things that's misunderstood about that is like, well, the batches don't match. It's like, you're not going for the batches to match. You're not trying to match the batches. You're trying to, in the aggregate, show that the machines counted those ballots that were in the system properly.
Sure.
Now, if you want to talk about did illegal ballots get inserted and those kind of things, that's a different issue than the machines counted properly what was put into the system. So that puts that to the side. And we've had claims in Fulton County of these pristine ballots. And we've got them from, and I know the woman who made them. I've known her for years. And the batch she said it was, we had 2 investigators go and spend about 10 hours each going through this thing and looking for them, didn't find them. They went back to her and said, she goes, well, maybe it was this batch. And it was a batch number that didn't exist. But every batch we've looked at, there are no pristine ballots in these large numbers. And one of the things that Fulton did, which I said was insanely stupid at the time, and he did it anyway, they had their COVID outbreak not long before LNA testing was going to happen. And they had to close down the office. So they were under the impression, okay, we won't be able to do LNA on the machines. We're going to have to do 100% hand marked paper. So they have what they call their Plan C, and they ordered 100% of the ballots necessary for each one of the ballot combinations for each one of the precincts. So there were boxes of wrapped blank ballots sitting there that everybody saw. And then it's like, why are all those sitting there? It's like, because of this idiotic idea, because they then were able to do the LNA testing and run it, but they still had all these things sitting there, which again fed those kind of conspiracy theories. And I told them at the time, don't do this, it's a waste of money. But again, when you have more money that increases and more money than sense, you do things like that just to be safe, not thinking about the consequences that come out of those things.
Speaking of SAFE, I understand that has the SAFE Commission been disbanded?
It was, once they did the report back in
The
2019, they
report?
were done, yeah.
Okay. Did you guys do a PMO was there a PMO done between Dominion and you in the state?
PMO, just,
Project Management Office. Was there a Project Management Office set up?
we didn't do it
When
in
you
the way,
first said-
in that kind of way. What we basically had is me, and understand, I didn't want the job. And then we dealt with with Tom Feehan, who was a project manager in Georgia, and then Nicole Nolette, who was a project manager in out of Denver. And we had essentially daily phone calls. Every day at 10, we had touching base with all the players that were in there. So you can call a project management office every day at 10 o'clock. We had a meeting to make sure everybody's hitting their goals and their marks. And one of the biggest logistical things that I was happy with was I had an internal goal, which I didn't want to put out in the world too much because I was terrified when we were going to hit it, was that we were going to have the last shipment go out by Valentine's Day, and we did. Then that was from the initial amendment, and people said there's no way. I talked to people in D.C. said there's no way you can get all this stuff out, and I was like, the hell, we're going to get it all out. We ran shifts, and we were able to run a very good, efficient system on the acceptance testing, because the way it worked was machines come in, Dominion sets their software up on them and everything, and then we have our acceptance testers going on the line behind them. And we had a very low failure rate, thankfully. But there was failures, which made me feel good when I was explaining that one time. It's like, why? It's like, because if you get 0 failures, you're not doing enough. You're not doing acceptance testing right, because you're always going to find something. There's always going to be something manufactured wrong. So I think we were at about a 0.14% failure rate on some of the stuff, and it was mainly on the touch screens. And those were actually repurposed. They were originally built for restaurants as a thing for the servers to go in, the POS systems. Not necessarily POS, but it's more for the ordering system in the back of the house. And so they're very robust, and they were designed to take a lot of beating. And so we were able to get through all those things, and we had some, it was really funny, some of our biggest logistical holds, one of the technology ones, it was like the soft-sided cases for carrying. Those are some of our biggest logistical issues with some of those things. So we were doing reshipments on stuff at the end, but every piece of equipment was acceptance tested by the state of Georgia before it went out to the county. So we did a lot of robust testing. We still have all the paperwork on all that, which is in little rolls on the thermal paper in boxes back at our Center for Elections. Okay. And frankly, I'm very proud of the logistical job we did. My goal was I was trying to find a former military guy who did logistics to be, because all this was a giant logistics deployment for the most part. The IT part of it was the smallest personal part of it, but getting the actual equipment out to everybody in the right place in the right time and coordinating with some of these. There's some offices out there, like there's a county in South Georgia where they have one part-time employee who works 24 hours a week because they can't afford to give her benefits. So we're dealing with people like that, and we're dealing with people like DeKalb and Fulton, which have full-time staffs and warehouse management and trying to coordinating all that. And we had to do a lot of white glove delivery. Okay. So we had Dominion paid extra for that to make sure that a lot of stuff got there, and we were able to hit that mark, and then we even hit the secondary mark getting the additional equipment out before the general election in November.
Okay.
10 minutes?
About 15.
Okay, good. Well, I'm almost done. Good.
Almost done. You don't tell them we're going to beat our schedule.
Well, I'm going to try to be like the Dominion. Try to be. So here's my question on, you may not know this answer. Do you know who anyone reached out to, do you know who Brandon Hurley is from the state of Texas?
No.
So Brandon Hurley is a guy that evaluates machines, systems, okay? ES&S, Dominion, Hart, all of them, all of them, okay? And since 2013, he's denied, the accreditation of Dominion software, all the way back to their Azure 1.3 up to 5.5A. So do you know who did any reference checking on from, I guess that's I'm not sure if that's a DOAS question, like when you went down and said, okay, we're pretty much good to go. Because
there were references done, and I couldn't remember the exact way it was done. I was aware that Texas had not certified them. I personally knew that, but I was an evaluator, so I couldn't say anything about that.
Yeah.
But also, from what I understand now, in large part, it's based on things that are true of every system, which is a little frustrating because, as I've understood it, it's like there are ports. There are ports on ES&S machines. There are ports on hardware and Civic machines. And in every system you do, no matter what it is, they all have vulnerabilities. Every single one that exists. Hand repair ballots have vulnerabilities. It's the processes you put around those things to mitigate those vulnerabilities that are the important things, and the safety measures you put in with passwords and technician keys and those kind of things. And every vulnerability I've heard about relies on the same thing, which is essentially a bad actor. And a bad actor, if you have a bad actor inside an elections office, it doesn't matter what your processes are. And you can mitigate it partially because it would take multiple bad actors to affect a lot of machines. But the same is true for, it's easier, if you had a hand repair ballot system, it's easier to stuff a ballot box and no one would know. Because we have, like on the adjudication module, there's an audit file, and you can see every person did everything on those things. You have the audit files for the scanners, you have the audit files for the BMDs to see what's done on those things. So to me, that has a better, more transparent paper trail than does a hand-marked paper system, especially because you just print up those things based on the ballot combinations. Those are the main things. And most of the questions of fraud I hear about are around absentee ballots and not around the BMDs at all. That's the most things I've heard about these things. So,
yeah, the absentee ballot thing, I've already asked Nancy that question. To me, I'm just an old infantry guy. So, like, if you ask for an absentee ballot, and I checked the law in Georgia, if I'm Mary Jones and all of a sudden, the news media is telling me, my God, there's fear all out there all over the place. I asked for an absentee ballot sent to my house. Why can't I just take it and fill everything out and then put it back in my mailbox?
You can.
We trust the Postal Service, right? I mean, they
Well,
went
some
through
people do.
snow and rain and sleet and everything else. So why did it have to happen now? I think we went from this pendulum, hardly none, no absentee ballot boxes, right? I mean,
No, there were
drop
none.
boxes. I'm sorry,
There were no drop
Not
boxes
drop
because
boxes.
they weren't allowed in the law.
Yeah.
But we did have you could drop them off at the registrars, and we had COVID. Frankly, we had COVID, and there was a lot of fear around the postal system, quite frankly, and it was driven by politics and some reality. So those are the two things that happened there. So we had to take that into account. I think drop boxes, and here's the thing, drop boxes are much better monitored than a USPS post office box. If somebody's
cameras
ballot
and everything
harvesting,
else there.
they
Yep.
can just go drop it in there. There's no cameras, anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we had cameras. We required the cameras. Could we have done it a little bit better in terms of you now have to catalog that video for X amount of time?
Correct.
But again, having the cameras there was important. And we did a study with MITRE, which is the federal lab.
Yeah, right.
And they said mathematically it doesn't look like there was anything that was up or down off the log line for that. So it doesn't appear that there was anything that was out of scope on those things. And the other thing we got to remember about this is if there was a large amount of absentee ballots that were illegally requested or improperly requested, we'd have had thousands of people showing up at the polls going, I didn't vote, and we didn't have that. The main issue we had of people not understanding anything was when we did the absentee ballot applications in the June election, what was originally the May, when it moved to June because of COVID. People over 65 just checked the over 65 box, which they may not have read and may not have realized that puts you on the register to get an absentee ballot every election this cycle. And people are like, I didn't request this. And then we go back and we're like, you did. You didn't mean to, but you did. So, and what we did is when people voted in person and canceled that ballot, we took them off the rollover file again,
Sure.
saying that they have taken a subsequent action from the initial, so now they're off of the rollover file. So the final rollover file, I think, was like 580,000. And all of those, again, were tied back to actual voters.
Okay, no, perfect answer, great. And I may have to ask this to Mr. Raffensperger, but and I know in reading the Tottenberg lawsuit thing, there was some discussion with some of the people there about Pro V&V. So I have a concern that, for years Pro V&V, from what I understand, didn't have their certification updated on the EAC website. And
Well, I
they
think
did
that,
afterwards.
No, here's the reality. The EAC didn't have a quorum to accept anything, so they couldn't do anything. That was the reality of it, as I understand it.
So more government bureaucrats working inside an organization that don't have their stuff together.
Well, the
Because
Republicans and Democrats wouldn't appoint people to it, so they never had a quorum. But
Got it.
but no, you're not incorrect in that.
Yeah.
But no, Pro V&V is a federally certified lab, and there's only like 3 in the country that do those things: Idaho
That's a
National
problem.
Lab,
That's
Pro
a problem.
V&V. Well, only so many people go and get the certifications done through those bureaucratic hoops. I'm not going to argue
Correct.
the point with you.
Correct.
So.
And do you know what percentage of their business, Pro V&V's business, goes to Dominion?
No idea, because they do ES&S, they do Dominion, they do Hardner Civic. I mean, they do everybody.
I'll share a document later on, or I'll give it to Andy. They get about 80% of their business from Pro V&V. Gets about 80% of their business from Dominion only.
Well, to be fair,
which I believe
we used Pro V&V when we had ES&S. The reason we used Pro V&V was because the state of Georgia had been using them since 2002,
Okay.
or their equivalents.
And that's my question. On the testing and validation, Pro V&V did the testing or SL1? Because from what I read in the lawsuit, Secretary Raffensperger said that we used Pro V&V, and then we found out that it was SL1 had done the initial testing, and then they had to come back. A couple of people came back and said, well, it's de minimis. If you look at the Tottenberg issue, there's some really fascinating discussions about who did what, who did when, how to get recertified.
Here's my question on some of those things, depending on which thing you're talking about, because the 2017 lawsuit where you have a liberal activist judge who has
Correct.
decided to stay in the middle of this thing.
Correct.
There is a fundamental problem with having people who are very smart in a certain area who think they're very smart in every area. And I'm not going to accept certain facts and evidence until I see them from the attorney.
Sure. Absolutely.
But that particular lawsuit has been a very big frustration point, because frankly, the claims are ridiculous, and the fact that even extending it is ridiculous. It's costing us time, effort, money, and they're going to make claims that they made us do things which we were going to do anyway. We were going to replace the system. We already decertified the system before we said you couldn't use the system.
Right.
I mean, but again, on the testing of it, no one has said the testing was wrong. No one has said the testing is bad. They're just, people try to say, well, you get this much from this, so therefore they're going to try to do those things. They have a reputation to meet too, and if there was bad things, and also remember, we did hash value testing afterwards, and as you know, you can't really, it's very difficult to fake a hash value, although
Yeah,
you can do it.
you can do it.
ES&S did it in Texas for several years and never got any blame for it for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. We also do LNA every time before we launch them. Every single machine is logic and accuracy tested, and that is how we found the issue that we had to do the de minimis change for beforehand. Is 2 counties found the fact that on some, if you had a certain set of combinations, only one side of the ballot showed up on the United States Senate special election. And I remember very clearly because I was in South Carolina visiting friends and visiting their little, at that time, 4-year-old daughter. And I was in the driveway and I was talking to a Dominion about this, and because 2 of our counties, Muskogee, actually no, it was Richmond and Douglas, found it, I believe. And we said we had to do this, and they said, well, we can do it, we can do it to 2 pages. Like, no, we're not doing it to 2 pages. We're going to have everybody on the same page, and you're going to get this thing done. And that's where that came from, because they had done it in Louisiana, and their LNA testing didn't catch it when they had a thing like that. So our robust LNA testing caught this issue on the software, because they were not used to having that many candidates, because it was 22 candidates on a single page.
Okay. Okay. Do you contend the SOS election management server, the county election management servers, the system scanners, the tabulators, and Nolan poll books are never connected to the internet from the time election is prepped until the time election is certified?
No, that'd be insane. Now, the EMS always never touches. The BMDs always never touch. The scanners always never touch. The poll books are designed to be hooked up to the internet. That is their role. You have to load the voter information on there. And in fact, we have to do a final load on the Saturday before the election to make sure we have all the early and absentee votes noted in there so nobody double votes. That is the intent of that. Now, we do it through a singular SSID through Meraki's that are set up inside the warehouses right now. That's the way it's set to do. Now, the system is designed, and in other states, they just have it live on the internet all the time. We don't do that. Although there would be benefits and risks to doing that as well. But for right now, no. During election, nothing is hooked up to the internet. You have a Bluetooth, basically cellular Wi-Fi, so that each poll book in the location can talk to each other.
Okay.
And that way, Bob can go in and vote, get his card from one. He can't go back to another, booth later on and get another card to vote again.
Okay. I'll read your statement, then you just give me yes or no on it.
Okay.
So, Manage This. You were on a podcast with a group from Manage This.
Yeah.
Okay. And I pulled off the transcript. I don't want to go back too far. But you said, and then we had this November trial run, blah, 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 blah. And then you said in this, let me get my glasses out because I am getting me an old fart.
Well, I know this is for the pilot.
No, I don't think it was a pilot. It says,
November trial run, though. That was the pilot.
Yeah. So I remember I was in the car driving to Bartow County and was in the places we had. And they're telling me, we don't know what the issue is. We're going to try to get it. Maybe you can get it reloaded. And I'm like, turn on the internet.
Yep.
Turn it on. Turn it on now.
Yep.
Turn it on everywhere.
Yep.
And then fix the problem. And so what about security? It's like, well, if nobody knows we're turning it on, that's secure. Now, I know you're being flippant, probably saying that to them, okay? But, so we turned it on, loaded everything, and then turned it off. So that part.
But hold on, what you're saying. This is a poll pad. This is a poll pad. This is not anything else. This is literally just the poll pad. And we didn't have any choice, because this is what I was telling you, there was a problem with the way we were uploading it. We were taking individual USBs to upload each one without ever touching the internet, but that's not how the system was designed, and there was a field missing. So it didn't line up. So the only way we could have those 6 counties run their elections properly was to turn on the internet, load it on there for 5 or 10 minutes, and then turn it back off again. And what I meant by being secure was, again, pilots, nobody knew what was happening, and now we discovered this issue, which is why we now have cradle points deployed in every single county.
Okay.
That was what the pilot was intended to do. And yes, it was only the poll books, not the EMS, never on there. Not the BMD, never on there. Not the scanner, never on there.
Okay,
so
good.
yes, my contention remains the same.
Okay. So last question. We good?
Yep. Last question.
So all the things that happened, you notice I haven't asked one conspiracy question, anything, and I'm not going to, because it's not my role. You probably already handled that 100 times. Okay?
I don't think you ever handle it, you just manage it.
Yeah, it's true. So the last question is, are you satisfied with the results so far, even though there have been some lawsuits out there And now everyone moving toward, on both sides of it again, the Capitol's in session. We're going to have these peeing contests going back and forth. I don't think it's ever going to end. I asked Nancy the same question. She says, no, I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think she's more on the Democrat side, I think. But
I
could be
don't
wrong.
know. She does a good job of holding that close to her chest.
Yes. So do you think we can proceed as a state moving forward in 2022 without all this hammering back and forth? Do you think the voters, the average Joe Blow, Jane Blow, who works, come home, is working every day, and then all of a sudden turns on 11 Alive and hears Senator Dingleberry over here from this side and Senator Smith on this side having a
colloquy?
made in Washington kind of like Mr. Smith goes to Washington problem? Because I think, quite honestly, I think people are tired of it. I mean, I think you're probably tired of managing some of the inequity. So you sound pretty confident in everything you've done, from your standpoint. And I'm going to ask Senator Mr.
Secretary.
Raffensperger's question. Thank you. But you know, Mr. Kemp got a document from Mr. Rossi back on November 17th, just a couple months ago, about the RLAs. So have you seen that report? Have you seen that document?
I've seen the basis of it. Here's the issue, Mr. Rossi, as I explained to you earlier. He's under the impression that these are supposed to match exactly as the batches did, and that is not the goal. And this has been explained to him on more than one occasion. Now, there could be better processes and procedures, but we didn't know we were going to do a full hand recount going into this. We did have ballot manifests that were done for the first time, because you have to have ballot manifests in order to do a risk limiting audit.
Okay.
And that was one of the reasons I think we should have more audits that are random.
Yes.
Because,
Yeah, like drug testing.
well, if every 2 years you do it on the biggest race, your people aren't going to be trained. They aren't going to have the muscle memory of doing it properly. So there should be the risk of having to do it properly all the time. That's why I think we should do that in the law. Now, I don't know if any law is going to pass this year. Here's the main problem we have. Partisans on the left and partisans on the right in this state now, for the last 2 election cycles, said, my guy lost, I was cheated. And the problem is that undermines people's faith in the elections overall.
Yep.
I mean, it goes back to 2000 when, George Bush was elected, was selected, not elected. It goes back to 2016. If you poll Democrats today, a majority of them still believe that Russia's hacked machines and flipped votes to give Donald Trump the presidency. In 2018, Stacey Abrams lied over and over again, and lied and lied and lied, and said, these voters were suppressed. They have all these people on hold. They're not on hold. If they showed up with their ID, they could vote. One of the people in that list was Jesus Christ on Heaven Street, spelled with an I.
Yeah.
I mean, so
I was a poll worker in Cherokee County.
She laid the foundation for this, and many of the claims of the Trump side, including out of the Totenberg suit. If you saw the memo to seize the voting machines, Totenberg herself was cited 3 times. These sides feed each other, and 85% of the American public say, I just want to go vote and know the outcome's okay. And the audits show it was okay. The fact that we have these local decentralized elections show these are okay. The complexity of the system makes it very difficult to steal an election. We know where you usually see stolen elections? Sheriff's races in a county. City council races where like somebody goes and gets 27 votes and they win by 13. Not presidential elections. It's just not a rational, real thing. And as you point out, you didn't ask conspiracy theories, you asked process questions. The outcomes, no process is ever perfect, and you're always improving the process, and we're always improving the security, and we're working with the counties every day to do more of that. In fact, I just got the call before you came in here that we're using geocoding as we do redistricting so we don't have people put in the wrong places.
Sure.
So we're working every day to improve the system and every day to make it safer and stronger so that every Georgian can have the faith that the outcome of the election is the outcome of the election. The winner's the winner, the loser's the losers, and what we need to have happen is the losers need to suck it up and come back in 2 years and fight it out again.
I'm an Army Ranger, so there's so many people that can become Army Rangers. There's some that can't.
Yeah.
And typically they don't whine and complain they didn't make it through the cut. They just suck it up and go do another MOS.
Go ring the bell somewhere and move on.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you.